Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the final high-level plenary of the 2024 Climate Law and Governance Day. My name is Tejas Rao, and as Senior Manager for the Center for International Sustainable Development Law, which serves as the Secretariat to the Climate Law and Governance Initiatives, I've been one of your moderators over the course of the day. It is now our deepest honor to welcome you to High-Level Plenary 3, Breaking the Oil Spell Through Law. And with us, we have our chair, Advocate Ilona Miller, who's partner at Gilbert and Tobin, who is a distinguished legal expert in international and domestic climate change law and policy, leading multi-jurisdictional cases to foster implementation of the Paris Agreement by governments and the private sector. A respected board member of the Natural Resources Access Regulator in New South Wales, she has been recognized as Band 1 in climate change by the Legal 500 Asia Pacific 2024 and is a laureate of the Climate Law and Governance Global Leadership Award. Advocate Ilona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tejas. I am absolutely delighted to be joined this afternoon, evening, and morning, depending on your time zones, for the session on breaking the oil spell and the link to law and policy. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Reda Sharif and Dr. Fuhud Hassanova, who are the authors of Breaking the Oil Spell, and both very esteemed economists and academics in their own right, to discuss this afternoon how their research on economic diversification can inform the development of climate law and policy, particularly in the context of a just transition under the Paris Agreement. In the interests of time, I will jump straight into our conversation with the esteemed authors. And I'll start, I think, if we sort of start with a little bit of context and introduction. Dr. Rare and Dr. Fahoud, your book, Breaking the Oil Spell, The Gulf Falcon's Path to Diversification, was written in 2014, 2015 in the context of the urgency for diversification for oil exporting countries following declining oil prices in that period. And it was written very much with a development lens. In 2015, the world celebrated the Paris Agreement, but the Paris Agreement was really highlighting the urgency of diversification and a just transition to address the climate emergency. I was hoping I could ask the two of you, what are some of the key messages from the book, and how do you see those messages resonating in the context of the energy transition that we need to implement to meet the Paris Agreement goals?
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ilona. Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. Maybe I'll start. I'll jump in. Yeah, and thank you very much for mentioning our work on diversification in oil exporting countries. So in a nutshell, the message of this edited volume was threefold. The first one was that the possibility of a sharp decrease in, I'd say, persistent fall in oil prices is taken seriously. So this issue that happened in 2014 in Kuwait, and at that time, oil price was still above $100. Right? So in that sense, what we're saying is that this happened in the past, and it could happen again, especially in light of development in renewable technologies and electric cars. But now that reality actually, I mean, it became a reality, and in fact, it accelerated. Right? So since then, electric cars now, are just happening. We see their kind of meteoric rise. The cost of producing electricity with renewable energy has been falling dramatically. So our message actually has been reinforced. Then the second point is to say, well, what's the solution for oil exporting economies? And one of the solutions is to emphasize sophisticated export industries. So that's a very important point compared to, let's say, going into, services or low scale, for example, tourism and other industries. So that was a very important message. And then third one, well, as a natural hedge for oil exporting economies would be renewable technologies, right? Because it's sophisticated, because it's an export industries, and more important, well, it's if you want, negatively correlated with the fossil fuel prices, right? So it's kind of a natural way to develop for them.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Fahud, in sort of elaborating on key messages, are there also some key case studies that provide good examples of that diversification?
Thank you, Anna. Great to be here, albeit virtually, but still exciting to be part of it. So I'll say, we mentioned few case studies in the book, like who were oil exporters, kind of big oil exporters in the 80s, 90s. To some extent, they still, oil exports are not a small part of their external accounts, especially a big part of their fiscal accounts. These countries are Malaysia, Mexico, and Indonesia. Now, in a way, they managed to, of course, to diversify away from oil, but they didn't rely on oil as much as many other oil exporters that have been kind of pumping oil since the 50s and kind of still do so today. And a big chunk of their revenues, export revenues, come from oil. So perhaps it made it easier for these countries to diversify, but at the end of the day, it's not a easy game. It takes decades. Even Malaysia took 2 to 3 decades for it to develop its industries, mostly based on multinationals, FDI, electronics, and other industries, kind of going the value chain of palm oil and some other commodities they were producing. So it takes time, but it basically means it has to start now. Diversification has to start now. You cannot wait.
Great, thank you for that. So in looking at some of those examples, all of those countries mentioned, Mexico, Malaysia, Indonesia, they've submitted their nationally determined nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. We'll be looking to submit new ones early next year with the February deadline. And those nationally determined contributions will be supported by various policies which will look to implement measures to decarbonize. Some of that is in the form of renewable energy. We also see carbon pricing coming into play, but we also see in some of these countries they're still quite reliant on fossil fuels, and indeed in some cases emissions are growing in that sector. One of the things that's really struck me when I read the book was I think it was about chapter 7, you called out the role of clean innovation as a contributor to policies that really support diversification. And Dr. Ray, you mentioned that in your opening comments as well. Are you able to sort of elaborate a little bit more on how policies such as carbon pricing and subsidies or other measures to sort of support clean technology research and development can support both economic development and climate change mitigation?
So market solution, right? So-called market solutions and other policies should be seen as complements, right? Rather than just, one silver bullet or just one solution. And they're really complement in the sense that what happened is what is needed is kind of prepare the ground such that renewables become competitive, right? Or just on the cusp of becoming competitive. And the market solutions actually would kind of confirm or push the market, right, toward a critical mass. So it becomes just self-sustained, competitive and basically sustainable in the long run, but also in terms of the social cost too. So you need both solutions so that the social cost is minimized, right? So you don't, lead to sharp increases in prices. And so in terms of, what needs to be done such that these policies to increase renewables accelerate and also make sense, I think one of the key things is a change of perspective right? So I'm kind of using your question actually to make a
Yeah.
point. I'm sorry to do that, but I don't mean to hijack it. But I think it's very important to realize that there's really a need to change perspective about renewables, in the sense that instead of seeing it as, oh, we impose on ourselves a cost, right? I think policymakers have to see them as an opportunity. Basically, it's not just about the cost of, a coal power plant versus, solar panels, but it's an opportunity to create new capabilities. Procurement is a way to create new companies, new capabilities, export market, learn new things. That's one thing. You have to also think in terms of spillovers and other effects. Having an infrastructure like a renewable infrastructure can be actually an argument to attract FDI. So I'll advertise another book, Professor Lebdewey's Survival of the Greenest. He makes this point about how in Costa Rica, having access to renewable is actually an argument to attract FDI in such technologies. And then in the end, this is a huge market that's developing, and it's an opportunity for developing countries to be, part of it. And the value chain is pretty extensive. So these are all chances. So it could be a niche industry within the value chain. But I think there's a chance for countries to kind of, join this trend. And then, more countries invest because of, how to say, scale economies. These technology will be cheaper, and in the end, as I said, they become sustainable.
Right. I might sort of stay on this theme and just come to another question I wanted to sort of ask both of you, which flows from this. We've seen in a number of the Gulf states, and this is sort of both before and quite a lot more since the book was published. A number of those states have been actively pursuing some, very incredibly large scale and ambitious renewable energy developments and green precincts. Places like Masdar and Neom sort of come to mind. How do you see this investment in infrastructure supporting greater diversification and transition? And do you see these as sort of, green infrastructure and green cities as models to be replicated?
Let me try to tackle that one. So I think the key goal, or kind of the key objective, should be in terms of what sectors we want to build as an economy, as a country. So if there is a huge reliance on oil, whether it's exports, whether it's fiscal revenues, the question becomes, how do we create these alternative sectors, right? And once there is some sort of consensus, because it also takes time, so there should be this kind of continuity in terms of policy. Then one can start thinking about, okay, what we need to start building those sectors, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's skills, whether it's certain regulations and legal kind of structure that has to be in place, right? So I think if one approaches the problem from this angle, then it becomes a bit clearer, rather than kind of just building a physical infrastructure and then hoping that things will happen, that some market forces will come into play, and and we'll have green shoots and small firms, startups, and FDI will just come. I mean, Rida just mentioned, you may have it as an attractive opportunity for some FDI, foreign direct investment. But at the same time, huge infrastructure projects cost a lot of money, right? So you have this opportunity cost. You are spending money on this when you can spend on something else. And the question becomes, how important it is. And I think the key element here in this in this issue is to think from the perspective of what we are trying to develop. It should be sophisticated, export-oriented services, so we can, move away from oil, right? So we can decarbonize, energy transition can happen faster. And the only way it can happen faster if you have these alternative industries in place.
Okay, fantastic. Last year at COP28 in Dubai, the UAE presidency launched a couple of very sort of ambitious initiatives. One was the Global Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Pledge, and as part of that, the objective was to triple global installed renewable energy capacity to at least 11,000 gigawatts by 2030, and to double the rates of energy efficiency every year until 2030. We're here in Baku at this year's COP, and the COP presidency this time from Azerbaijan has also invited countries to join pledges to increase global energy storage capacity to 6 times above 2022 levels, and achieve storage in the sort of scale of 1,500 gigawatts by 2030, and enhance the network of energy grids. These types of initiatives are sort of set at the global level. A number of countries sign on to them. But when we sort of move to actually implement, you need domestic regulation policies and ultimately investment. How do you see these initiatives sort of playing out, particularly in those states that do remain heavily dependent on oil and gas?
Perhaps I'll try to answer this one. I think these pledges would have an effect mostly as a signal, right? That, I mean, of course, as you said, these are pledges, but I think they also signal that these investments make sense, right? Because we see now that more and more these technologies that are competitive. I think the latest show that renewables, just from a perspective of cost, right? They make a lot of sense. If we add to these pledges to install, storage capacity, then basically we're solving intermittency problem, right? The fact that, you don't have renewable generation all the time. So this could be a powerful signal that, economies of scale will keep playing out. These energy sources are becoming cheaper and cheaper, so more and more renewable. So for oil exporters, I think the major effect will be a realization that this trend might be accelerating, and there's a need again to diversify. And while this market is huge and accelerating, so it's also an opportunity for them.
Great. Dr. Fuller, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess, to add another angle, it's, one way you can complement this is also to kind of engage in green industrial policy, right? So when selecting sectors, and Rida mentioned it earlier, it creates this natural hedge. Even if oil prices fall, you have this other alternative sector that is that will go, that will help you essentially in terms of your revenues and export earnings and so on, right? So, but I think the key element here is not just the deployment, kind of the adoption of technology, it's actually development, right? Because if you want to develop the tech in these sectors, in renewables or alternative energy sources or electric cars or parts of this value chain, so anything related to that, then one has to think about how to create these clusters, right, of firms, startups, FDI and so on, that will give you this opportunity to grow and diversify away from oil.
Okay, fantastic. So moving gears a little bit, one of the things that I sort of track very closely in the negotiations, and I'm very passionate about, is the role of carbon pricing and market mechanisms. And we have Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which enables countries to participate in cooperative approaches. How important do you see carbon pricing mechanisms, access to international markets, to creating the enabling environment for investment into clean energy and clean tech?
I guess I think any kind of scheme in place to help countries decarbonize probably is going to help, right? Carbon taxation, we economists will have carbon taxes. It's basically one of the kind of the first tools in our toolbox to kind of change incentives and kind of change behavior. But I think at the end of the day, it's probably fine, might be necessary at some point, right? But it may not be enough. I think what is important and what's sufficient, and actually there is economic literature behind this as well, kind of theory and empirics, showing that carbon taxes on their own are not sufficient. What you need to have this alternative available. You know, it should be relatively cheap. So once you put the tax in place, people can switch. Because if you put in the tax in place, well, switching might be too costly. But the price goes up, you may not be able to switch right away. So maybe demand falls in the short run, but not much, because usually it's quite inelastic. So it doesn't change much as prices rise. So essentially you become poorer, you know, it creates this kind of doom loop to some extent. And we've seen that in practice. You know? So creating this alternative, cheap alternative, should be done, if not simultaneously. I mean, if not before, at least simultaneously.
Okay, excellent. And Dr. Reddy, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, this just to maybe illustrate, right, what Fuad mentioned about the complementarity between carbon pricing and other policies. Perhaps a good example is Tesla, right, which is kind of one of the best examples of kind of green technology rising, and how different policies helped the growth of Tesla. So for years, one of the main sources of revenue for Tesla was actually these transfers, right, from carbon pricing. No, we're talking about you know, huge amounts, no, of money that was transferred. But at the same time, in 2000, the company was in dollars. Another policy where, you know, there was an interinvestment, because now it's one of the most successful companies in the world. But at the same time, you know, it was spurred by innovation and technologies that were developed to a large extent thanks to grants to universities, public research institute, but also this vitality, like I said, sorry, this very dynamic sector, no, in Silicon Valley. So it's really this interaction between market, state policies, state intervention, but also, you know, helping these companies grow. And then at some point it becomes just, you know, sustainable, because now there's a sustainable market for it, and the company is competitive.
Yeah, it's such a good example. Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and the last question before I open to questions from the floor. Something that we've seen as a focus of recent sort of climate negotiations and COP meetings has been the concept of a just transition. And when we look at sort of what that means, we talk about greening the economy in a way that's fair and inclusive to everyone, and creating decent work opportunities that leave no one behind. How do you see this narrative of just transition informing economic policy? And are there any sort of specific policy or regulatory steps that have been successful to enable a just transition in some of the markets that you've looked at?
Maybe in terms of just transition, maybe one perspective that is important is the kind of north-south, or rather some countries that will be kind of in control of these new technologies and the rest will be relying on them. So I think that's kind of, there are a lot of experts and academics have been pointing at the importance of actually technology transfers to help, you know, developing economies actually not just adopt the technology in terms of just importing, but also be part, as Fuad mentioned, part of the value chain. But then in terms of the energies themselves, you know, moving, so we're already living in a world where inequalities have been rising. So in a sense, there will be a change in the structure and then the industries, but the issues I think are kind of deeper, right? Where we're dealing with high inequalities, and there's a lot of people discussing the implications of that and how to tackle it. But I think at the deeper level, yeah, there's a reflection on, you know, how to tackle inequalities. But perhaps one of the opportunities of green technologies is, for example, these decentralized grids, the fact that, you know, I would say the frontier is blurred between consumer and producer. You can be part of the grid, produce to the grid. So maybe that's also a chance to kind of to have kind of a structure where you don't have just, you know, a company or a big company versus consumers, but something more collaborative. But yeah, beyond that, I guess maybe Fuad there's other points about that.
Maybe I can just add to it, kind of from the perspective of employment. You know, at the end of the day, we kind of, especially for the developing world, but also for kind of left behind in advanced world, you know, it creates opportunities to have good jobs, right? So basically, you know, whether it's development of the technologies or deployment of the technologies, it would require a lot of public investment coupled with private investment, right? So that should create a lot of jobs going forward. And that's the issue. The decision has to be made in order to spend and also kind of catalyze the private investment to spend. And that would create good jobs in many places, right? And I think I have one paper we wrote with Philippe Aguillon of Collège de France and LSE, kind of was titled Fair and Inclusive Markets, you know, why dynamism matters. So it's essentially, you want to create this dynamic economy, dynamic meaning, and Rida mentioned it earlier, these sophisticated sectors, you go toward these sophisticated sectors, could be, mostly tends to be in manufacturing, but it's not just manufacturing, it's also sophisticated services. So once the economy start moving to it, whether it's from the developing world or advanced world, and go toward that, you know, the wages tend to be higher and tends to have much lower market income inequality than otherwise. So I think that's also kind of a goal to have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, you know, the opportunities for training, development, skills-based enhancement, all of that is going to sort of help with, you know, with the economic sort of condition in countries as they diversify and hopefully grow in a green economy. I'll just check with our coordinators. Are we at time, or do we have time to perhaps just field a couple of the questions that have come through the chat?
I think there might be time for one or two questions.
Okay, well, I will just sort of moderate some of the questions we have, and perhaps pose two questions for our esteemed authors to respond to. There are two themes that I'm seeing in the questions. One is around, as countries move away from oil, what happens to their economy? And I think we've discussed that through the course of the panel, but you know, I guess this is sort of coming from a position of you know, students who are in countries that are heavily dependent on oil. So it's that, you know, what happens. And then the other sort of theme that I'm seeing in the chat, a couple of questions around the role of carbon capture and storage, and does that sort of create opportunities in those countries as well, perhaps even in terms of that sort of movement to more advanced processing, manufacturing and new technologies. So I might just sort of close with those two questions, if you've got very brief you know, responses to either or both of those.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the first one and then let Fuad answer the second, but briefly. So what happened to country? Right? You can have a scenario where we have kind of a blueprint of the 80s. With Fuad, actually, in the chapter we wrote, we document what happened to oil exporters in the 80s, and we compare it to the, you know, the recession in the 1930s. And we discovered that it was actually more severe. It took 25 years on average for oil exporters to get back to their kind of level of consumption per capita, no, after the onset of this kind of super cycle of oil prices. So it was pretty severe. So, but that's assuming it was the same, that we keep the same growth model, if you want, basically a growth model where exports are mostly oil, and then most of the tradable are important. But now, if countries manage, right, to prepare the ground, have export industries ready, insert themselves in value chains, especially of green industries or renewable industries, because that energy transition accelerates. Well, in that sense, what may happen is you could have a transition. Some industries may be kind of, falling, but others will be rising, and we should see a different pattern now, like a different macroeconomy dynamics, not necessarily increase in employment, but increase, as Fuad mentioned, because of these dynamics. But the real question is how fast this energy transition will happen. According to our work at Fuad, it could be really fast, much faster than what people think. And the second element is how ready they are and what's the kind of work they've been putting into this.
Just maybe I can address the second question, given the interest of time. I guess, these technologies are still in the early phases, so they're pretty expensive, but at the same time, it creates an opportunity, right? Because once you develop a tech, you scale it up, the costs fall, and air capture and storage, carbon air capture and storage become kind of feasible. The question, of course, becomes, when down the line. Eventually, it has to be done, probably, because we're talking about net zero, so there will be some capturing happening. The question is it what kind of tech? One has to be careful. What will make it at the end. Direct air capture is very expensive at this stage. So I think what's happening now, it's more within the facilities, like say cement plant or steel plant, where you can do it much cheaper. So there are opportunities. One has to study where one can kind of plug itself in terms of the value chain and see what can be done. All right. A lot of other tech in terms of renewables, electric cars. So there is a whole spectrum of kind of the technologies that can be developed, and countries will have to decide, given the kind of the size, resources they have, because some are too expensive, so it's going to be harder for smaller countries. Some are probably more feasible, so it's not an easy task to choose which sector in this spectrum of kind of green technologies, but one has to make a choice and kind of pursue it. And that be a way to kind of do both: decarbonize, provide opportunities for others to decarbonize at a cheaper cost, and also create diversification.
Great, thank you. Look, I think that's all we have time for this plenary. I'd like to sort of ask our audience to join me in thanking our esteemed panelists, Dr. Reda Sharif and Dr. Fuad Hassanov. Thank you very much for your time. I'll let you get to your flight. Hopefully you can make that, Dr. Fuad. And I'll hand back over to Marie-Claire for the closing of today's proceedings.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ilona, Reda, and Fuad. After that insightful set of high-level plenaries, as all good things must come to an end, and that also includes great things, welcome indeed to the closing of the 2024 Climate Law and Governance Day. We are delighted that so many of you have been able to access such interesting sessions throughout the course of the day and have stayed all night with us across time zones right through the end. Maeve?
Yes, thank you. We're especially delighted to underline once again that for the first time ever, certificates are available for participants in the day who've joined at least 4 of the sessions of the symposium and who complete a brief evaluation form over a link that all registrants will receive by this Monday. So please do keep an eye out in your emails. As hosts, we're delighted to be able to provide this valuable recognition for participants who joined during the day. We'll now turn back to the chairs of the 2024 Climate Law and Governance Day, Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Seger and Professor Rashad Ibadov, to lead us in the closing. Professors, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Advocate Ayman Jerkawi, Advocate Maeve McDermott, our Masters of Ceremonies, for an incredibly rich and intensive day. I should also thank especially all of those who have stayed with us online or joined as their time zones permit throughout this remarkable set of engaging and extremely inspiring discussions. To help us close this rich and substantive dialogue, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome several global leaders of climate law and governance community to share their insights and closing thoughts. And we are delighted to introduce them now. Now, Professor Damilola Olawuyi is still on a flight, and I have been also told that another of our colleagues is unable to join. So we will be three last closing speakers who are each in their own way leaders in climate law and governance, and especially in sustainable development worldwide. First, I will welcome Advocate Wayne Gardner-Williams, founding president of the International Intertribal Trade and Investment Organization and principal director of Garwell Law Professional Corporation, who is a distinguished global advocate for Indigenous environmental rights. He is on the board of directors of the International Law Association Canadian chapter, the Council of the Great Lakes region, and he also leads Indigenous Sovereign Trade Consultancy. He's a research fellow at the University of Oklahoma, teaches at the University of Waterloo, and is the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Bridges Business 2019 award winner for excellence in Aboriginal relations. Wayne, of course, is also Plains Cree from Treaty 6, Moosomin First Nation. Wayne is joined by Advocate Kelly Sporn, who is Special Counsel and International Head of Strategic Delivery, Sustainability, and ESG at DLA Piper, coordinating DLA Piper's international firm sustainability and ESG business strategy. A renowned specialist and thought leader in ESG, she advises several key industry fora related to sustainability, writes for multiple publications on ESG compliance, and specializes in intrinsic drivers for nature positive strategic change. And finally, we are joined by Advocate Döne Yalçın, who's managing partner at CMS Turkey and partner at CMS Austria, as well as the architect of CMS Global ESG and Sustainability Strategy, and a member of the CMS ESG and Sustainability Steering Committee. A distinguished expert and senior legal leader, she specializes in ESG compliance, advising clients on key challenges such as supply chain management, the carbon border adjustment mechanism strategy, and ESG reporting. These three organizations are core partners in the day. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. And my co-chair and I, who are here online, would like to especially welcome them and ask them to help us to close this day with a few insights of their own, as well as hopefully good wishes for the 350 odd people who have joined us for the closing, as well as the 3,400 who are going to be watching the videos online over the next few days as their time zones permit. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Welcome, everyone. And these closing comments, I have just a core central point. I want to remind everyone that the UN Special Rapporteur for Indigenous Rights, Francisco Cali, stated in November 4th, 2024, when he addressed the United Nations, on the issue of COP, one of his statements was to allow the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in decision-making processes at all levels of the COP process. Indigenous peoples play an essential role in the advancement of climate action, and their voices must be heard. And that is what Francisco Cali has said as the ambassador for the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights. And so the closing thing I want to leave you with is the fact that the indigenous lens to these problems need to be respected. So, for example, the World Economic Forum global report on the Global Risk Report states in part that humanity relies on indigenous communities to be stewards of ecosystems, protecting and preserving environmental resources. Indigenous peoples comprise less than 5% of the world's population, but protect 80% of its biodiversity. So why is this important for this conference? Well, Indigenous peoples may hold some of the secrets to sustainable economic development for the next 100 years. And I just want to share with you three concepts, three Indigenous lenses that environmental sustainability can possibly embrace, and nation states can look at as a way of looking at how we can be successful the next 100 years. Just three. One, Secwepemc peoples in central British Columbia. They're keepers of the salmon. And in their territory, they have a vast array of salmon. They have coho, chinook, pink. And these salmon lay eggs and spawn and every 4 years. And these people understand from time immemorial that they're the stewards of the lands. And as such, not only take what they need from the bounty of nature, but actively exercise their fiduciary duty to nature to give back to the ecosystem. The second one, the Haudenosaunee, of the Iroquois Confederacy, made up of Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora nations. They have the Great Law, which is the seventh generation principle, to only make a decision that will not adversely impact the seventh generation. And this law is still applied today in decisions impacting energy, water, natural resources, and ensuring those decisions are sustainable for 7 generations into the future. And the last one, the third one, the Maori, the Maori of New Zealand, the principle of Takanga Maori, which is roughly converts into Maori traditional rules and cultural norms. And according to Maori environmental philosophy, the gods and spirits imbue nature and the world and the natural world and inhabit the mountains and rivers and other landscape features, as well as the ancestors. And so they're imbued in the living plants, the rocks, the trees, and because that humans live amongst nature, not on top of it, not to dominate it, but live within it. And that's humans have been given the gift of intelligent capacity and capacity to play a role to protect the ecosystem and to give to the next generation. It's that relationship within nature as being nature as kin. So in closing, Indigenous teachings, laws, and philosophies of being in the relationship with nature, not treating it simply as a resource or a tool, and humans having the responsibility, the fiduciary duty to nature towards giving back to the ecosystem as a measurable value so that provide dividends to long-term sustainability that could be looked at as a means of ensuring future generations' growth and prosperity. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne, for both an incredibly exciting and inspiring session earlier today with leaders from all over the world, Indigenous leaders, and the climate change provisions they've been writing into their treaties, and also for your words of wisdom as we close this conference. We have to remember that our concepts of law are still so embryonic and so fragile, and we could have a much richer and much more substantive understanding of law and governance if we listen to all of the legal systems and the diversity of rules and concepts and imperatives that make up this much broader, more interesting world than we ever imagined. I will turn now to Kelly, Advocate Kelly, for a few words of closing.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I would also say that it's quite a hard act to follow Wayne. So I can't promise to be as engaging as him, but I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what the power of law is in terms of generating change in the sustainability transition, particularly in climate. As has been mentioned, I'm doing postgraduate research with Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership at the moment. And one of the first pieces of research I looked at was looking at not what lawyers could do in relation to climate, but what should they do. And I think that imperative case is really important. Voluntary action in this area is incredibly valuable, and without the really important people that have been involved across today and across many of the COPs and in between the COPs, taking the time to make sure that they're putting this front and center of the agenda wherever they can be, we wouldn't be in a position now where we're facing any kind of hope of being able to generate genuine climate action. But the imperative case is really important too. One of the things that we need to be able to do here is to be able to mainstream these concepts so that it's not being seen as something that sits within CSR teams within the private sector, but it's actually seen as a critical part of business strategy. Some of the phrases that have been used previously is that we really need to rewire the economy. The policy, law, and regulation in that respect plays a really critical role in that mainstreaming. Paris Agreement was landmark because it set our collective ambitions, but some of the most transformative change we've seen since then has occurred when states have responded to address the Paris challenge domestically, and particularly through regulatory policy. We heard in the last session about the importance of industrial policy, and I think that's actually got a long way to go still. But regulatory policy has got a really important role to play in terms of actually getting businesses to be thinking about this. One of the criticisms that's often laid by advocates of voluntary climate action is that if you've got lawyers, you'll always find a way for people to get around actually having to obey the spirit of the law, maybe just obey the letter of it. And that can be true when you've got simplistic policy approaches. But what we've seen, particularly in Europe more widely, and I'm defining Europe here in a geographical rather than political sense, is a systems thinking approach to climate policy. They've recognised that the transformation needed to shift the mainstream approach requires an iterative process and that it also requires multiple levers across economies. That's to ensure that this doesn't become a compliance exercise and that it actually creates a genuine transition of the economy. So just to take one example, back in 2018, the Bank of England raised the prospect of introducing climate financial risk into the supervisory framework. And this was based on the then governor's work in generating the TCFD recommendations. The UK became the first jurisdiction in the world to require its banks and insurers to think about how climate change would impact them from a financial risk perspective and how that would also impact their business strategy. And at the same time, other policymakers in the UK introduced a complementary set of disclosures, which then made sure that the data was available so that they could understand their exposure. One of the other things that Bank of England did that was really important was said, you need to be able to talk to your counterparties about this. So that then meant that anyone that the banks and the insurers were interacting with were potentially going to have questions asked of them about what their role was going to be in climate. We've seen a similar position adopted in the EU in many respects, but we've also seen the EU target the asset management sector, which is a very deliberate and clever choice. If you want to shift a whole economy, one of the things you do is you find the sector that touches everyone, and most people need at some point or another to have either money or insurance. And if you're looking at the financial services sector, the hinge point is asset management. So by a very clever piece of law targeting one particular part of the financial services sector, the ramifications across the wider sector was enormous. And then that had an effect across the economy in different ways. We've also seen things like introduction of supply chain regulation. If you're a policymaker dealing with a global problem, but you've got the jurisdictional limitations on you, the one way you can get your bang for your policy buck is to address it through supply chains. And one thing we've witnessed is that even in jurisdictions that aren't even anywhere near the scope of the regulations, so that they're not going to have to comply with this themselves, they're deciding to make their supply chains more sustainable in anticipation of what their European customers are going to be asking for. We've seen changing stewardship requirements. We've seen a change in the focus of what disclosure is focusing on. We've seen greenwashing regulation and supervisory standards. Those have activated stakeholders to also put pressure on businesses. I don't want to overstate the position. There's a lot more that still needs to be done. And obviously the clock is ticking. But I'm seeing for the first time in my career, businesses asking for more regulation. They want to be empowered to make the decisions they need to mainstream climate and other sustainability issues. If I leave you with one thought today, it should be that whatever else needs to be done, we should never underestimate the power of law in generating change. Thank you.
Marie-Claire, you're muted.
Of course. Welcome to an online conference. Well, thank you very, very much, Kelly. And thank you especially for your excellent and very inspiring remarks. I agree with you. And of course, it's part of our theory of change that if we can convince enough of our colleagues to be that shield and to convince everyone else to at least hold back a little bit with their swords, we will be moving as far forward as we can during these very, very difficult times. I'm going to turn to Derna Yalcin, who has joined us as well online, and I'd like to welcome our fourth speaker, who it looked like, due to the loss and damage negotiations and informal informals, wasn't going to be able to come, but has actually managed to separate himself and join us as well. So I'd like to warmly welcome, of course, one of the architects of the Paris Agreement, an incredibly committed barefoot lawyer who works with the communities affected by flooding and other impacts of climate change across Bangladesh as executive director of the Center for Climate Justice of Bangladesh, who is also, of course, one of the senior negotiators and advisors of the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, and of course, the new response fund that after literally a decade of struggle, they have managed to secure in the negotiations just last year. So I will welcome Hafiz Khan, who will be joining us, and I will especially turn to Dirna to hear her words on this distinguished closing plenary. Dirna.
Thank you very much, Marie-Claire. I will be very, very quick because I definitely want to hear, so to say, our last speaker and his insights. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for having me. It's really a pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for organizing this very, very, very important, so to say, course. We are here at the grounds, many of us, right, and running from session to session, from negotiation to negotiation. And one thing which is echoed everywhere is policy. I mean, legal is really the backbone and the heart of this transition. So Kelly mentioned already a lot around how important it is for the movement we need. But let me share with you some additional thoughts. It's not just about the, so to say, quantity, but quality of regulation and policy. You know, with new policies coming in, we often see in practice when we try to help businesses to become good corporate citizens and to transition, that they're often blocked, right? When regulations are not talking to each other, when they're just focusing on one sector and not, so to say, having a holistic approach. A lot of clients who really try to transform their businesses to turn this challenge into an opportunity are stuck, right? This overheats systems. This creates really inefficiencies. So what I would ask all you to do is, as then, so to say, going out, advocating for a very, very important client we can have, which is nature, right, which is environment, to really raise your voice and really show with specific examples which regulation is not working, where we need legal reforms, where we need other stakeholders at the table, like businesses, right? They are not just the bad guys. They can and they have to be part of the, so to say, solution. And if we try to understand them better, we will not only talk about risks and mitigating risks and challenges, but about opportunities, right? So turn yourself from being just a pure legal advisor to trusted advisors who can translate between, so to say, the risk, the challenge, and the opportunity, and, so to say, all the positive, so to say, implications this could and should have. And we should never forget that I did, so to say, I was sitting at the panel with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And there was a very, very important question coming from someone who is located in an emerging market, in a developing market. And we were sitting there at the panel with EBRD and others. We're talking about these countries need to scale up technology, right? They need to do capacity building and everything, and look at the best practices around. And this participant asked me, yes, that's nice, but what about our local circumstances, right? So shouldn't we not talk about them too? And there I said, of course, there shouldn't be, there is no one size fits all, right? And we lawyers need to take care about these nuances, right? And bring in, so to say, the environmental difficulties we face in different jurisdictions, understand it better, right? Not just look at it from an international lens and say, oh, that worked very well here, let's go there. And I was very open with them. I said, don't misunderstand me. We are representing the global north. We had the wealth, we had the technology, and yet we made all these mistakes, and we are here. So learn from our mistakes. Please, all of you, communicate these mistakes, right? In a very, very honest, brave manner. So that's my ask. And I'm really thankful of being here and having the opportunity to talk to so much great leaders of our future, which hopefully help us from preventing the worst scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirna. And your message of courage, of contributions, and of compliance is a powerful one that we are picking up in our work, and we are going to be developing as fast and as furiously and as exponentially as we possibly can in the coming years, because it's so clear that it's necessary. I'm going to turn now to Advocate Hafiz Khan for his final words of closing.
Thank you, Professor Maria Clara. It's my great privilege to attend the closing plenary. So I think Climate Law and Governance Day has become a prominent event at the COP processes that brings together many lawyers, practitioners, scientists, academics, and to discuss and to develop some legal strategies to take the climate actions. So I would like to appreciate Professor Maria Clara and her team for your great efforts for this event. Being one of the lead negotiators for 45 least developing countries on loss and damage, I would like to take the opportunity to update on the current state of negotiation on loss and damage, and I would be very brief. So the agenda for COP 29 here for loss and damage is to review the Warsaw International Mechanism. This is the third review, but what are we gonna review? We would like to review the performance of Warsaw International Mechanism, how it is delivering to meet the needs of vulnerable communities and ecosystems. So at this moment, if we look at the global landscape, loss and damage landscape, we do see a solid institutional architecture. We do see Warsaw International Mechanism with two components, that is executive committee. I'm one of the members for this executive committee that aims to provide the political and policy guidance to the vulnerable states. Second, Santiago Network that aims to catalyze the technical assistance to the vulnerable communities, and that works with an advisory board that is also a constituted body. Finally, there is a loss and damage fund that was established back in COP27. Now it is going to be operationalized. Luckily, I'm advising one of the board members from LDC group. Now the Warsaw International Mechanism Loss and Damage Fund is there. Santiago Network is to be operationalized early next year. Loss and Damage Fund to be operationalized early next year. Now, issue is to access how the vulnerable communities and state can access these funds. So we need to prepare ourselves how to access this fund. We need to develop some institutional and legal strategies back home so that we can access the technical assistance from the Warsaw International Mechanism, also from the Loss and Damage Fund. Here, what we are doing in terms of review, we are trying to ensure the coherence, coordination, and synergies among the global landscape so that it can deliver and meet the needs of the vulnerable communities at the ground. So we are working still. I'm coming from the drafting session. Hopefully tomorrow we can draft something to and we are working hard. But if we cannot complete the drafting tomorrow, then we will go for next week under the COP agenda item. Thanks all of you to hearing from me. Thanks again, Maria Clara, to giving me this opportunity to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafiz, for the incredibly important work that you are doing and for the work that you are doing in both directions, yes? I mean, you're doing it to help to convince all of us to take seriously loss and damage and what it means for all of your people. And at the same time, you're doing it with the highly climate vulnerable countries who are looking for ways to be able to operationalize these international mechanisms that have been put in place for and by them so that they can actually make the law work for them. And that work that you do is incredibly important and deeply, deeply appreciated. So thank you to our distinguished closing speakers, all representing very important partner institutions that we are looking forward to further deepening our relationships over the coming years. I would like to also thank everyone who is with us, all of the incredible speakers who have joined us all day, and the chairs and hosts of the sessions that have led to such a rich day. Before I share my own concluding remarks, I would especially like to pass the floor to my co-chair, Dean Rashad Ibanov, who has been a partner through the entire process and is here with us to share his final words for today. Professor Rashad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie Clara. good evening, good afternoon for everyone. I'll try to be very short and precise. So as we come to the end of this conference, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the participants, speakers, partners who have contributed to our conference today. Indeed, your dedication, insights, and collaborative work and spirit is what makes this a wonderful conference. I especially would like to thank my co-chair, Professor Marie-Claire, and her team, especially for this fascinating conference. They did absolutely a fantastic job. I would also like to thank my colleagues from ADA University School of Law, who have been working very hard, both for this conference and the legal course, which is going to happen at ADA University in person on 17th of November. And most importantly, I would like to thank to students and young volunteers who have been participating in this conference. They are indeed guarantors of our future and sustainable world. Well, we have heard that the world has been facing environmental challenges and crisis, putting peace and our sustainable development in risk. And in this regard, we have also learned that change and I would say constitutive action is needed more than ever. The challenges we face perhaps are too complex and maybe our fates are too intertwined in that context. And I would find courage to say that in that context, we have a choice. Either we can work together in common cause and build a more prosperous and more sustainable future, or we can just go, if I may say so, go down together. In this regard, it is crucial, I believe, to continue investing on strengthening the rule of law, fundamental human rights, fairly structured political justice, social inclusion, effective and accountable institutions, and to promote innovative governance solutions, not only within local or national level, but also in global context. In particular, it's important to reestablish trust in institutions, which require greater transparency and integrity, and a genuine commitment to understanding and responding to people's needs and interests. Empowering people in communities to claim or to protect their rights, or I would say participate in decision-making, may also help to basically move forward our actions toward climate justice and environmental transformation. Of course, indeed, governments must take the lead, but the collective efforts of international organizations, civil society, parliamentarians, media, youth movements particularly, private sector, and other stakeholders will be needed to overcome the standing environmental challenges that we face in our modern world. In other words, it is only by working together we can create a more peaceful, just, favorable, and environmentally sustainable world for all of us. Thank you again. I wish you to have a great evening or day.
Thank you very much, Professor Rashad. As we draw our Climate Law and Governance Day 2024 to a close, you have all of our gratitude And despite these very challenging times, a renewed sense of optimism for the future of climate law and governance, that the exponential scale up that is so desperately needed is possible. I mean, indeed, in the words of Albert Einstein, it is possible because it is necessary. Today's discussions have demonstrated the extraordinary power of legal innovation and collaboration in addressing the climate crisis. From our morning's exploration of climate compliance in international courts and tribunals, to the incredibly rich and substantive expert sessions ranging from Pacific Island students and bringing climate change to the International Court of Justice, to sustainable finance rules and standards for climate transitions in emerging markets, to growing the bioeconomy through law, to climate competent lawyering, the rights of migrants, to Indigenous treaties, voices and practices, just to highlight a few of the incredibly fascinating conversations that our partners and hosts have been able to hold together today. Then our afternoons deep dives into carbon take-back obligations and breaking the oil spell. We've witnessed the breadth and depth of legal expertise that is being brought to bear on our greatest global challenge. Indeed, the justice challenge of this century, which is climate change. I am particularly delighted in this context to share, and I gave you a sneak preview this morning, some remarkable achievements that highlight our community's current action. First, it brings me special joy to highlight the announcement that we shared this morning. I am thrilled to underline that thanks to all of your efforts, we have reached, indeed exceeded, our Glasgow COP26 pledge that we made during Climate Law and Governance Day in 2021. We set a very ambitious stretch target to expand our climate law capacity registry from 600 lawyers worldwide to 6,000 registered climate law and governance specialists by COP29. And this week, we celebrated crossing this crucial milestone. Indeed, this tenfold increase represents a new generation of legal expertise ready and prepared to throw everything they have at tackling the climate crisis, which is possible because it's necessary. Yeah. In the spirit of expanding access to climate law and governance expertise, I am also very, very honored to announce that through our Democratizing Education for Global Sustainability and Justice program, under my chair in Lucy Cavendish College at the University of Cambridge, and based on the success of a pilot partnership with the government of Sierra Leone last year, we will be providing 150 more bursaries for online courses in sustainable development and the law. And these are for key essentials briefings, 3-week certified courses, to current and future law and policy leaders from climate vulnerable areas. Specifically this year, we are exploring new partnerships with Pakistan, with Bangladesh, and with the Caribbean small island states. This contribution directly addresses the gaping capacity chasm that we discussed this morning, especially ensuring that those on the front lines of climate change have the legal tools they need to be able to not just implement their nationally determined contributions and progressively undertake more ambitious commitments, but indeed take on those much tougher challenges that Professor Rashad has underlined if we care about climate justice, the rule of law, inclusion, and a transition that leaves no one behind. Now, to discuss this and indeed to be able to see each other in person, for those who are here in Baku with us, I'm very, very happy to invite you all to join us tomorrow, Saturday, November 16th at 6:30 p.m. inside Event Room 5 in the Blue Zone, or online via the COP28 platform for our special side event, Legally Bold, Law and Governance for Ambitious Finance and Nationally Determined Contributions. This session is particularly timely, as we know that out of the 186 first round NDCs, over 169 prioritized legal institutional reform just in order to be able to meet their targets. And we have another round coming, and we're going to need all of that law and policy expertise in all of those countries on the ground now. We will explore in this event how law is advancing an ambitious new collective goal on climate, finance, adaptation, resilience, and just transition to net zero, while also examining ways to reduce barriers and inspire new NDCs that are a great deal more ambitious. So as we close today's proceedings, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished partners and hosts with their chairs of the different substantive sessions, and keynote speakers, and indeed all speakers, our dedicated organizing team, and the network of incredibly inspiring law and policy leaders and volunteers who have been with us through this entire process across multiple time zones, and some of them up at 2 o'clock in the morning or awake till midnight, helping to make this day a success. We deeply, deeply appreciate your contributions. And of course, to each of you who participated in this vital dialogue. Your commitment to advancing climate law and governance gives all of us hope that together we can still build the legal frameworks that are needed for effective climate action in time. Thank you all. I am actually looking forward to continuing our important work together, not just at tomorrow's side event, but moving forward. And in that light, I would like to give the very last word before turning back to our Masters of Ceremony, to our rapporteur, Advocate Lara Duvartiris, to let us know what is going to happen to all of your incredible work here today. Advocate Lara?
Thank you so much, everyone, for this mammoth day. As noted in the opening, I'm honoured to be joining you for the next few years as the inaugural rapporteur of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. So going forward, I will be collaborating with you all to prepare the report from the day. And thank you to our team of moderators and rapporteurs who volunteered to make that possible, who will be sending me notes for collation, and to the entire team. Thank you so much, not just for today, but for all that you've done. We're hoping this report will convey the flavour of the rich and insightful dialogues we've heard today, depending on your time zone, but also sharing the new partnerships, the projects, and potentially law and policy reform that has been sparked and strengthened throughout the day. So I look forward to getting in touch with all of you, to our chairs and speakers in the coming days as we advance the report, and following up with you all from the brilliant collaborations that have been launched and highlighted today. So look after yourselves, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the close of the 2024 Climate Law and Governance Day here in Baku. Please do join us for the 2025 Climate Law and Governance Day during the UNFCCC COP30 in Berlin. Thank you very much. Take care.